Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. Welcome to People's Republic. My name is Brian Griffith, and this week we are going to be talking about a new proposal by the Texas Workforce Commission, a proposed rule that would be in many ways kind of devastating for an entire subset of workers in Texas. That is to say that on Wednesday, January 23rd, a group of different organizations, including the Workers' Defense Project and the Texas AFL-CIO, held a press conference opposing the Texas Workforce Commission's proposed rule that would lead to a misclassification of workers in Texas hired via internet platforms. I know that's kind of a long setup, but this is a very important story that's going to affect a lot of people throughout the state of Texas. So to talk about all this over the next half hour, we are joined by Juliet Barbara, who's the communications director for the Workers' Defense Project. Thank you very much, Julia, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So can you, let's start with exactly what this, what this proposed rule is, what it's all about, and why this is going to be harmful if it goes into effect for workers.
Well, as you mentioned, it is a rule that would potentially have a lot of a broad impact on workers in Texas in the form of misclassification. So it would lead to misclassification of workers who would otherwise be considered employees, and it would lead to them being known as independent contractors. This is huge because as an independent contractor, you would lose really essential benefits like the right to minimum wage and the right to a hazard-free work environment or unemployment insurance or workers' compensation. So it does this in a really weird, kind of hard to understand way. It changes the definition of someone of an independent contractor by saying that anyone who finds work through an internet platform or is dispatched through an internet platform would be an independent contractor, would be what they call a marketplace contractor, and therefore would not be eligible for unemployment insurance.
And what exactly is that supposed to mean, a marketplace contractor?
Yeah, great question. Great question.
You're giving me a look as though like, oh yeah, your guess is as good as mine of like sort of, this is a bizarre rule. So I know Workers' Defense Project has filed to essentially get some information on essentially like who kind of is behind this, because there's been kind of a national kind of lobbying push by, it seems like probably the rideshare companies such as Uber and Lyft, the kind of usual suspects in this kind of legislation. What kind of have you heard either through an information request or otherwise through just kind of your research into this?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions. And part of the problem is that this was done in sort of the dark of the night. And Texas Workforce Commission has not given a lot of information. We did submit a public information request, as you said. Haven't heard back yet. It's still being processed. But we do know that certain companies have a lot to gain from this. And we know that workers have a lot to lose, and the state has a lot to lose. There has been a trend around the country of not just Uber and Lyft, but also a company called Handy, which I think is a New York-based company. They recently raised $100 million in VC funding. They're growing very fast, and they find and dispatch handymen and women to people's homes through this internet platform. And so they have been behind a lot of the lobbying, and it was reported in courts that in many cases, and I think it was like 7 different states, they actually drafted the bills, a few of which passed. And this bill looks eerily similar, or this proposed rule looks eerily similar to that language.
What are some of the what are some of the kind of giveaway language issues there, or otherwise, how do you kind of know that that this is similar?
Yeah, well, I haven't read all the bills, but I think some of it has to do with the overall frame that we're in the gig economy now, as they say, and there is a gray area between independent contractors and employees. How are we going to classify Uber drivers? How are we going to classify sort of on-demand carpenters? And this bill is very much written as if it's all to clarify this gray area for businesses, right? And that was kind of a similar trend. And then things like marketplace contractors, that's now a term that is getting broader pickup. And so that's another reason that it's very troubling, because it seems very geared towards businesses, and independent contractors are 20 to 30% cheaper than employees. So we get why companies want to classify them as independent contractors, but it leaves workers behind.
Yeah, and I imagine that many people listening, this would be my guess, that many kind of people listening will have had some sort of, general interaction or have otherwise worked as independent contractors. I know that a lot of my own kind of jobs have, a lot of my own money has come from these kind of what I believe to be absolutely miscategorized independent contractor labor. So this to me is an issue that is particularly close to me because, not just because of my personal experience as a quote unquote independent contractor and seeing how that miscategorization works, but also just because of the vast kind of injustice that comes with that, because it's really in a way it not only it's cheaper for employers, but it also on just sort of a social level, what it sort of does to a person, it transfers over the kind of burden of everything. It transfers over all of the burden of, essentially what should be kind of employer obligations. And then all of a sudden you as an independent contractor are now stuck with, for instance, if you're doing rideshare, you now have to maintain your car, have to do all this stuff. You have to find your own insurance, et cetera. So like the burden of, essentially the burden of maintaining the capital in this is transferred entirely to the independent contractors. It's a miserable classification. I have had points where I've owed several $1,000s to the IRS when tax season rolls around because of this kind of nonsense, and because it's so hard to kind of put aside a little bit of money toward taxes all the time when you're struggling with this. It's just really it's a frustrating thing for me, both on a personal level and just sort of understanding how this is kind of a grave injustice to so many of these workers who are really putting in so much time to providing all of these kind of services. They're just so often socially necessary.
Absolutely. And we think this should be enough for the TWC to reject this proposed rule. But there's even more disadvantage to it. So in addition to harming workers, it creates an unlevel playing field for small businesses. Essentially, all of the companies that already dispatch workers from online platforms have a huge advantage. They get to pay people less. And so that's bad for business in Texas. And it's also really bad for the state's coffers. So already we know that misclassification leads to about $50 million lost in the unemployment insurance fund for the state of Texas. So we really don't get why TWC wants to do this. Again, we have questions, and we wonder who's behind this and who stands to gain.
Let's also then talk about a little bit about the, kind of decision made here, because I know it's been argued by a lot of people that the TWC, the Texas Workforce Commission, does not actually have the kind of legal capacity to even do this, that this is in fact should be a legislative decision. I would tend to absolutely believe that. Who exactly is the TWC, and how, why do they feel the need to kind of step in this way?
That's right. So the TWC is a state agency, and they are staffed with political appointees. So the 3 commissioners on the Texas Workforce Commission are all appointed by the governor. And that, of course, means that they're removed from the voters of Texas. They're sort of a step removed from who would otherwise be the constituents if they were the state legislature. And but they do have a lot of relationships with business, right? They want to promote overall economic development of the state. We worry that maybe workers' voices have been left behind in this conversation. And if lobbyists were involved, we don't know that. But if they were, maybe they had guided this conversation with a heavy hand. So at the press conference that we held, we were joined by Representative Ramon Romero, who is a state representative in Texas out of Dallas, I believe. And he was pretty mad that the Texas Workforce Commission had just, done this and proposed this rule. And what he said is this should not be happening in an agency with political appointees. It should be happening in the Capitol, and it should be going through the deliberative process of the state legislature, because it's something that's going to impact his constituents and his colleagues' constituents directly.
And do you kind of foresee there being a major challenge coming from the Texas legislature, or sectors within the Texas legislature that might be able to challenge the legitimacy of this decision?
It's hard to tell at this point. We're still kind of in the waiting period. So we just closed the public file, the public comment period about a week ago for this rule. And now the Texas Workforce Commission has to discuss it and consider the comments and decide what it wants to do. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do decide to carry forth with this rule. I wouldn't be surprised if there was more opposition from the legislature, though there will certainly be opposition from us.
It has to come really from the ground level, from the grassroots level, as a kind of hackneyed a term as that can be at times. Still, nonetheless, that's where you see the results, is from these kind of popular movements, being able to put the pressure on, on these organizations who are otherwise, as we just mentioned, who are otherwise unaccountable to the people. But when there are enough people who kind of speak out and who make it known that there will be consequences for this kind of action, that people aren't going to just take this lying down, that then creates kind of the impetus for this. So yeah, I'm wondering what kind of your next moves might be, what more you might be kind of looking into as far as as far as trying to put an end to this, and what the kind of timetable is as to when this might go into effect.
Yeah, and I should say on the power of sort of grassroots organizing, we weren't alone in this. So we were joined by the Texas AFL-CIO, the Carpenters Union, Equal Justice Center, who are all great allies of ours. And this, again, would impact their membership as well. In terms of next steps, we really are waiting to hear what the Texas Workforce Commission has to say about it. They've been pretty circumspect in their statements so far. We have our public information request. I know some reporters who have public information requests. We're waiting. We are learning more and more information through media, actually, through the coverage that the media is doing. Justin Miller of the Texas Observer published an article recently that revealed how in meeting minutes for one of the Texas Workforce Commission's meetings, one of the commissioners actually referred to an individual that they had been talking to for multiple years. And so we want to know, who is that person? Simple question. We'd love an answer, and we're gonna wait for that information. And I think once we get that, or when we don't get that, we'll work with our coalition and representatives who are against this rule to move forward in a strategic way.
Yeah, you are listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We are talking with Juliet Barbara of the Workers' Defense Project about the proposed rule by the Texas Workforce Commission that would reclassify people who have been hired on online platforms, would reclassify and really misclassify them as independent contractors. This is a kind of gross misclassification that would, essentially it would be a huge kind of handout to very large employers such as Uber and Lyft. It would be kind of a free money giveaway to them. In some ways, it would allow them to skirt all sorts of labor regulations. It would be generally bad for Texas workers, and it would also be bad for business. As we've talked about, businesses trying to compete in Texas with these large corporations. I'm sure this is not the first time that the Workers' Defense Project has had to, really kind of fight back against the kind of deregulation that these, not just Uber and Lyft, but these just general online platform type companies, the quote unquote gig economy, essentially try to deregulate so much. So I'm wondering how your other work has kind of brought you into contact with them, has kind of revealed these to be just in certain ways parasites on the economy. Yeah,
it's interesting. So the Workers' Defense Project, as you know, is really focused on Texas-based workers, especially, and we've really created a niche around this, construction workers. And this is a huge industry in Texas. It's really important. Texas is the most dangerous state for construction workers. So every few days, a construction worker dies on a site in Texas. So this is just completely appalling, and it's our mission to help empower them to get more fair employment environments. And so because a lot of this gig economy is being led by the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, it's not something, to my knowledge, that we've come across too much. This is sort of, I think, a new issue for us to get behind, although I will say that I'm just newish on the job, so there's probably some history I don't know about. But it is dangerous because it is a gray area, because lawmakers are figuring this out as we go. And we know that people of all industries are finding work through online platforms. So it has huge implications for people, everyone from a carpenter, a handyman, to a massage therapist, to, of course, an Uber or Lyft driver.
So I know we have talked some about independent contractors and sort of what that's like, but I also think it's very important that people understand what actually is an independent contractor as a labor classification, because I feel that this miscategorization is far more common than most people would expect, and it affects far more industries than I think most people would expect. This kind of miscategorization of workers as independent contractors. What are kind of the rules and regulations around that?
Well, it turns out to be quite complicated, and the Texas Workforce Commission has a 20-point assessment for deciding if someone is an independent contractor or not. And but one of the overarching themes is how much control someone has. So if you picture the ideal independent contractor, someone who's successful and can earn a living, they have quite a bit of control. They might have a business entity set up. They might be invoicing their clients. They might have multiple clients in order to have a sustainable business and be able to change from client to client. They're also negotiating their rate. They're deciding how much they get paid an hour, or they're deciding a flat fee for a project. And because the tax burden is on them and much of the administrative burden, they're able to charge higher fees. That's not how it happens in the, quote, gig economy, right? People are finding work on Uber. They're finding work on handy.com. In many cases, the rates are already decided for them, or there's maybe a window in which they can choose what their rate is, but it's not much. Also, as an independent contractor, you might be working more than 8 hours in a day, more than 40 hours in a week, but you're not actually getting paid for your overtime because your employer is calling you an independent contractor. So this is problematic in many ways, of course, and I think a lot of these people don't have the kind of control that would be part of that test.
Yeah, no, thinking about any sort of gig economy job I've done, I've never had that kind of level of control to charge your own rates or whatnot. And very often this leads to far less than minimum wage outcomes to the point where I believe that some studies have shown, I hate to be vague, but like without having the study pulled up, I know that studies have been done essentially showing that over time, Uber and Lyft drivers, for instance, actually are losing money. They're not even making less than minimum wage, but when you include sort of, for instance, the upkeep on their car, the insurance, and you factor in those things long term, Uber and Lyft drivers actually lose money, according to what some of these studies have shown. And I think that's seems pretty likely from what I know of, from the Uber and Lyft drivers I've known. It's a disgusting categorization. Certainly the wages are incredibly low. The burden is so much on the worker to upkeep so many things. And there really there's no kind of freedom there for all of the kind of liberation, the liberation ideology and kind of the rhetoric that comes out of, you can set your own hours and whatnot. The truth is, I don't think most people really have that option to set their own hours when they're trying to pay their rent and whatnot. It essentially, it creates all those problems.
Right. The Texas Miracle works for some, but not the individual. And think about the impact on a construction worker, which is primarily our member base. They're doing hard physical labor. It's a super dangerous state for construction workers. If they're not guaranteed workers' comp, for example, there could be a huge disruption in their life if they got hurt on the job, which happens all of the time. So this is something that impacts all industries. We think it especially impacts people who are doing physical labor because they really are more at risk, and we should be doing a lot more as a state to protect them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to, also turn to some of the other work that the Workers' Defense Project has been doing. I know that, obviously the kind of voter purges that have been happening within Texas have made kind of national news. And I know the Workers' Defense Project has been involved somewhat on kind of that front. That, I think is an important thing for us to bring up as well. So maybe you can give people kind of a baseline of what we're talking about here.
Sure. So Texas and the South in general is no stranger to voter oppression. But recently, and you may have seen the headlines in the news, there was a pretty appalling move by the Secretary of State, David Whitley, who sent out an advisory to counties around Texas claiming that 95,000 people in Texas who are registered to vote are non-U.S. citizens. And this came out with no explanation of the methodology. We immediately got together with our partners and demanded they rescind the advisory and tell us about the methodology. How did they get to these numbers, which were reportedly from the Department of Public Safety? So over the week, different counties started sharing information. Reporters were digging into it. And James Barragan, for example, of the Dallas Morning News, found that at least 20,000 of those names are eligible naturalized citizens who can legally go and vote. And we should say these are all people who are legal in the state of Texas. And it's being wrapped up in this anti-immigrant, anti-voter agenda, and even got a retweet from Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling what they're trying to do here, which is as the kind of two things happen where we have kind of the shifting voter demographics. Obviously, Texas is already a very heavily Latino state, so you have the shifting voter demographics that are likely to turn the state quote unquote more purple or otherwise. The constituency is no longer behind the kind of hyper conservative politicians that have kind of relied on the low voter turnout. And that's the other, I think, half of that equation is that over the past couple election cycles, we have seen more of an interest in really people wanting to participate in democracy in a way that I think people were somewhat apathetic for good reason. People were sort of apathetic toward a lot of the more neoliberal politics and politicians. And now that now that I think economics have kind of changed quite a bit, now that social conditions are changing quite a bit, I think people have more of an expectation of being able to participate in democracy in some sort of democratic process, whether that's through voting, whether that's through like being involved in grassroots organizing, whether that's joining a union, whatever the case is, people are more interested in sort of having a stake in these sort of things. And to me, that is one of the main factors that's contributing to the voter purges here in Texas, as well as kind of throughout the country, but specifically in these kind of southern states. I know Georgia was also very infamous for that with Brian Kemp purging, I forget the number, but it was at least in the tens of thousands of voters from the rolls, even as he was running for the governor of Georgia there.
Yep, pretty corrupt. No,
Yeah.
That's right. I think that Texas leadership is underestimating the power that has been built up in Texas, especially since 2016. And, all these groups are out there and they are demanding better environments for Texans, better working conditions, and better agendas for voters. So already 3 lawsuits have been filed against the state. I think it's against the Secretary of State. We've got the confirmation hearing coming up for the Secretary of State on Thursday. It'll be interesting to see what happens and what the response is to Governor Abbott's promotion of David Whitley.
Hopefully we'll see kind of these changes coming within Texas, just in sort of a general level, because it's been such a draconian state in many ways. In many ways, the sort of lax labor regulations of Texas can kind of set the tone, I think, for labor regulations in other places. So for there to be the kind of changes that are happening here, for there to be really kind of more organized workers, or at least workers really attempting to organize here in new ways, and people really wanting to take more of a democratic, take more democratic control of the state here, that's going to have a huge impact, I think, nationwide.
That's right. As they say, if it can happen in Texas, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, I think you took about, what was that, like 6 or 7 words to say what I took, like a paragraph to say.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
Yeah. And for those people who feel that they may have been miscategorized as an independent contractor, or for people who otherwise just might want more information either about the subject or who might want to get involved, where can people find more information either about those things, about kind of knowing their rights, and how can people kind of connect with the Workers' Defense Project?
Right. So finding general information about whether you are misclassified or not, you can actually find on the Texas Workforce Commission website. Ironically, this rule is not in effect yet, and they do have resources for figuring out how you should be classified. And they do also process misclassification claims. So you can file a claim with them. I can't guarantee what the response will be, but they do process a lot of those. In terms of the Workers' Defense Project, we're a member-based organization, so we love building our member base. We often get people who come to the organization who have experienced wage theft because of misclassification. We have a employment legal services group that processes those cases, so they would evaluate your situation and see if they can represent you. And so I think those are 2 great resources. And just watch the news in the next few weeks. I think we'll learn a lot more information. There's actually a piece coming out from KView soon going into what this experience is like for people in different industries.
Yeah, that's real important. We'll definitely keep covering this story here as well. It's it's very important. This affects so many people. This has the potential to affect so many people. Just to kind of recap what we've been talking about. We have been talking about the essentially Texas Workforce Commission's proposed rule that would harm workers in Texas by miscategorizing, and this absolutely is a blatant miscategorization of people hired on independent on internet platforms such as Uber or Lyft or other of the quote unquote gig economy, the internet based gig economy. I just use those as kind of the examples. It would miscategorize workers hired through these platforms as independent contractors. Anyone who's ever worked as an independent contractor knows just how kind of miserable that can be if you're categorized that way, on some of these platforms or whatnot, or otherwise if you're miscategorized that way. That's a really awful miscategorization to happen that affects so much about your protections as a worker. It really affects labor, just general labor. It affects your safety. It affects your health, all that. So we're going to keep covering that. We're going to, as this story unfolds, we have been joined by Juliet Barbara, who's the Director of Communications for the Workers' Defense Project, to talk about, all of this. Thank you very much, Juliet, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM in Austin and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are also available as a podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. Now it's time for our monthly segment, Tech for the People, featuring Chris Garaffa, who's a technologist in New Haven, Connecticut. We are going to cover all sorts of, sort of tech news of the week and of the month. And just kind of talk about it from a mostly working class perspective and, try and parse out what kind of impact the various moves in technology have for the average person. So, thanks, Chris, for coming on the show once again.
Hi, it's so great to be back, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So you brought several articles once again to my attention that are really just absolutely kind of horrific. I feel like Facebook is always just kind of lurching from scandal to scandal. I'd like to start with the article from TechCrunch titled "Facebook Pays Teens to Install VPN That Spies on Them." And I'm wondering if you can kind of just go over briefly kind of what this is all about.
Yeah, this is really Facebook taking advantage of, people, so-called digital natives, right? People who live practically online. So Facebook, and actually it's not just teenagers. This is people 13 to 35 years old. They were paying people $20 a month, plus giving them referral fees to get their friends to install this app. So like imagine being 13 years old and bringing in $20+ a month, right? That would be fantastic, to you without realizing what you're doing. What the app that Facebook had people install did was actually take over their entire phone. And so Facebook could see not just what these people were doing on Facebook, but what they were doing on the internet, what they were doing in other apps, what apps they have installed. They could theoretically look at text messages, emails, phone call lists, all of those things without people really being aware of it. I'm sorry, when you are 13 years old, there are a lot of smart teenagers out there, but most 13 to 16, 17, even 18-year-olds aren't thinking about what they're actually giving away to Facebook when they're using it, normally through the app, let alone when they're giving Facebook access to all of this stuff that's on their phone. Forget the fact that, nothing on the internet is ever forgotten, right? You go post something today and in 20 years, somebody's going to have a copy of it somewhere to try to, embarrass you or bring up something, from your past, right?
As many kind of grown adults as I know who still don't really fully understand the implications of posting this and that online, as we all know, for Facebook to be targeting such young people on this is absolutely, there's no, I don't think, any kind of reasonable understanding from any 13-year-old as to what kind of this, this privacy violation would be, especially given that this particular app that was being installed, or the VPN rather, was also kind of bypasses all sorts of encryption. So this really, I'm wondering if you can kind of give a breakdown as to what the significance of that is when we're talking about just the level of information that Facebook had access to here.
Oh yeah, I mean there were so many layers of this story that it's just one shock after another, really. So a lot of this actually came to our attention back in over the summer of 2018. Facebook had bought an app for over $100 million, I think, called Anavo Protect, which said it was a VPN. Now, a VPN is supposed to secure your internet, web browsing, and email activity if you're on a network that you don't trust, like your local coffee house, Wi-Fi network, right? But this one was free, and we know that free means that you're the product. So Anavo Protect was actually tracking everything that you were sending over their network, not just your Facebook stuff, but it could read, basically any internet traffic that you were sending. It could have the ability to read. Apple shut that down. They removed it from their App Store back in June of 2018. Now, Facebook actually started to promote this other app, Facebook Research, kind of on the side, and did it in such a way that completely violated Apple's terms of service for its developer program. So really quickly, you can sign up to be an Apple developer, and you can put apps in the App Store that everyone can download and find, the games we all play, the Facebook app, and all of that. You can also sign up to just distribute apps inside your company. So, Facebook, for example, uses this for their HR stuff, right? So an employee can sign into an app that you and I can't get to and deal with HR stuff. Or the big example that's been given out this week was ordering lunch on campus. And that's fine. Facebook was using that process to give these folks using the Facebook Research app access to that app. These were not people that work for Facebook. This was a way that Apple says Facebook should have gone through the normal channels. But since Facebook had been blocked from doing that, they were going kind of through this side channel. So last week, Apple cut Facebook's ability to do that entirely. So not only do we have Facebook completely and blatantly violating people's privacy and, frankly, taking advantage of young people But we also have to have the realization that Apple controls ultimately what we put on our phones. If Apple can just say, this app isn't allowed anymore, it could be a news application, it could be, anything really. Apple can just say, hey, this app isn't allowed anymore. You can't have this app anymore. Or developer, you can't distribute this app anymore. And that's also actually a very scary thing, right? There's a balance that needs to be had here between security and making sure there aren't malicious programs on your device, but also, realizing that this one company that controls so much of the cell phone market has that kind of power to just determine what we're seeing and what we're not.
And really, I think it goes to show the need to move beyond sort of thinking about simple regulations and to understand that many of these products essentially function as public utilities in terms of how much information gets distributed. We've seen that if Facebook does indeed have the power to, for instance, swing elections, if Facebook does indeed have the power to really, crack down on dissident flow of information in so many kind of horrifying ways, as we've seen, for instance, with Facebook and Twitter banning the accounts of pro-Venezuelan or pro-Venezuelan anti-coup voices. If they can kind of do that en masse under the guise of preventing inauthentic information and whatnot, if they can do all of this kind of stuff that really has a massive political impact, then that deserves to be something that is in just a massive social impact, then that deserves to be something that is brought really under public control beyond simply simple regulations. But I'd like to also sort of take another angle here, and that is I'd be curious as to this what seems to be a shaping up of a feud between Facebook and Apple. This may have been going on for longer than I realized, but generally it seems like there's a battle going on, an intensifying kind of struggle for control over information, control over data here. And I'm wondering what that kind of looks like from your perspective.
That's right. There is, in some ways, a battle between these two tech giants. I will say that Apple does have a pretty good focus on privacy when it comes to other companies getting your information and advertisers getting your information. Now, that's not an endorsement of Apple in terms of, they work with the NSA, they work with the FBI and law enforcement, despite that, that major story from a year or so ago, where they didn't want to unlock a phone for the FBI, they still have, staff dedicated to fielding law enforcement requests. But Apple uses, certain measures to protect people's privacy from advertisers and things like that. Ultimately, though, what this comes down to is who has that control over your information. Is it Apple or is it Facebook? Or ideally, is it you? Neither of them want you to have that control. Those companies and Google. We should say, by the way, Google has a very similar program that they just shut down. It's very similar to what Facebook's app did, and they just shut it down after all of this stuff went down between Apple and Facebook. Google, Facebook, all of them want the control of your information, and whether they want to sell it or not, they want to monetize it, either for themselves or through others. Apple does do something called differential privacy, a very cool encryption and privacy method, right? And what it does is it says that we're going to share certain information with our services, but it's not going to be able to identify you. But if the police call up Apple and say, hey, we need to know who this person's been emailing, we need to know, who they're text messaging, they're giving that information over. There's no question about that.
Or I'd like to turn to our kind of next article, keeping on Facebook. This is from ProPublica. This is Facebook moves to block ad transparency tools, including ours, the ProPublica transparency tool that was put in. And this really, going back to this point of who should really have access to, the information, who should have access to kind of the algorithms and whatnot, who should be able to understand how these companies work and how their the website works and whatnot. This really is very revealing as to how little information Facebook wants us to have as to how they develop their political ads going into yet another election cycle that's likely to be kind of hotly contested. So I'm wondering, if you can give us kind of a rundown as to the significance of this ProPublica article about the transparency tools that they have and the level of transparency that they've attempted to bring to Facebook.
Yeah, sure. So, Facebook itself has been, or claimed to have been on a big transparency kick ever since they were, they were accused of allowing, so-called Russian interference in the 2016 elections and then the, 2018 elections, which of course is still nonsense, right? This whole idea that Russia won the election for Donald Trump because of, a few $1,000s of ads and whatnot, most of which, by the way, were after the election, is nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Facebook started out saying that, oh, no, this had, there was nothing like this. But as they got more and more pressure, they kind of fell in line. So Facebook has been talking about transparency. And so to that point, Facebook does have a tool on their website where you can see all of the ads that, political ads that have been run that you've seen on Facebook. And you can search by campaign, you can search by a bunch of other stuff and see, when they ran, who paid for them, and a bunch of other stuff about them, right? So that's great. I've used that tool. I've run political campaign ads, and so I've been on both ends of this. It's good. Sure. Here's the problem. Facebook, we'll go back. ProPublica and others put together a little browser extension, a thing you install in your web browser, that when you were on that specific page on Facebook, would look at what was on there and add it to a massive database that they were collecting, so that ProPublica would have and could publicly provide research and a massive database on all of these different political ads. Facebook just shut down their access to that. So this is not a transparency move, right? This is an anti-transparency move. Facebook says it's just trying to, enforce its terms of service. But if they were really concerned about transparency, they would reach out and work with ProPublica and Mozilla and others who want to encourage this kind of transparency instead of just blocking it.
Yeah, I think it's ironic looking at this quote from a Facebook spokesperson who said, quote, "We regularly improve the ways we prevent unauthorized access by third parties like web browser plugins to keep people's information safe. This quote unquote, this is a routine update and apply to ad blocking and ad scraping plugins, which can expose people's information to bad actors in ways they did not expect." Coming from Facebook, that's just rich. That really... just absolute hypocrisy, obviously. But I think, again, going back to kind of the Russiagate nonsense, the conspiracy theory that kind of started this is, has absolutely been almost all but disproven at this point, to the degree that you can disprove something that seemed to have never happened. When we talk about the quote unquote Russian interference, we can go back to really the only thing that's even resembled this was the Internet Research Agency, which is a clickbait factory, not a quote-unquote Russian troll farm. Most of these ads ran after the election. Most of them were not political. I mean, it's clickbait. People know what clickbait is, and it's been interesting seeing publications like BuzzFeed have to pretend that they don't understand how clickbait works when they report on the quote-unquote Russian interference that, somehow Pokemon memes and Pokemon Go and, puppy pictures and whatnot were supposedly, this sinister Russian operation. However, there does seem to be the real kind of concern of who does Facebook serve, what sort of misinformation is getting out, and what sort of kind of algorithmic bias and whatnot, and we'll get into that in a little bit, allows, there to be a certain kind of status quo narrative that comes from, more kind of state actors and more just generally like the corporate interest of the U.S. corporate class. In fact, the social media is all too willing to kind of bow to that, and has in many ways kind of ironically under the guise of preventing Russian interference, under the guise of preventing, I've even heard like Chinese interference and, Iranian hackers, North Korean hackers, whoever the kind of state enemy is, under the guise of preventing hackers from all these countries, will absolutely limit access to any sort of information that's, considered to be too dissenting or whatnot. You're listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We are in the middle of our segment, Tech for the People with Chris Garaffa. We've been talking about first of all, the new scandals with Facebook, which includes moving to block ad transparency tools, as well as paying teens to install a VPN that spies on them, which also kind of revealed the burgeoning kind of battle for information between Facebook and Apple. I'd like to, in our second half, get into some more of the articles that you had sent, starting with the kind of algorithmic bias that we had kind of touched on, I believe, last time. I think is an important kind of thing for people to be looking at. So our next article is from Ars Technica. This is titled, "Yes, Algorithms Can Be Biased, and Here's Why." This is an op-ed from a computer scientist weighing in on the downsides of AI. So we kind of touched on this last time. I'm wondering, what in particular from this article you find to be, from this kind of op-ed you find to be of particular importance.
I really appreciated this article as a good overview for people who, might be confused by terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, and all of that kind of stuff. It really lays it out pretty well as to what the differences are between, for example, artificial intelligence and machine learning. ML, machine learning, is just a method of artificial intelligence, right? But it also explains, this is my favorite part of it, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put garbage into a machine learning algorithm, you're going to get garbage out. If you give garbage to anything, you're probably going to get garbage out, right? So when you are training artificial intelligence through machine learning, if you put bad information in, you're going to get bad information out. There's no way to magically transform it into something good. So the problem is when you use, stuff like, facial recognition for mass surveillance, or even border security, which is now a proposal to not have a wall, but have border security cameras on the border, which would be awful. All of these kind of things, if you're giving bad information into these algorithms, that's what you're going to get out. You're going to get bad data. This is nothing new, by the way, to artificial intelligence or machine learning. There's a lot to consider here. When Apple first introduced its facial recognition software, it actually had a hard time seeing people of color, and especially darker skinned people of color, and recognizing their faces, because Apple most likely had very few darker skinned people testing these devices, right? So imagine probably a whole bunch of white people, or lighter skinned people testing that stuff. So the machine learning that it does to identify a face was learning based on what it had been given, not the entire world of experience that it could have. Again, what you put into it is what you get out of it.
It almost kind of makes me want to open up what we consider to be technology in a very kind of philosophical sense, in that essentially this, what people assume to be kind of an artificial intelligence, what people assume to be this kind of vastly technologically superior system, is in fact in many ways sort of just a sort of extension of a kind of older state and corporate bureaucracies or whatnot. Those same sort of systems that are in place, to automate or to mechanize any sort of processing of information. It doesn't seem to be a radically different sort of a process now than it was at any kind of point prior, any sort of previous point in sort of the history of just generally how bureaucracies develop. And I think I wonder if we're not seeing that sort of play out just on a grander scale with this.
No, I think we actually are. And I want to, we can use some of these things, detecting biases actually for good. And it's not to say that it's bad to intervene with these data sets. So I want to give this example from Google, right? Everyone knows Google has this, and if you don't know, you should know, Google Translate, which is actually really cool. You put in some text from one language and it translates it to another language for you. Google Translate had a huge issue a while back with gendering, right? So if you put in a language that doesn't gender its nouns, like something that would basically be he is a doctor, but in a language where there's no he or she assigned to that noun, it would translate it to English as he is a doctor, because doctor is primarily has been primarily identified with male, men. But that's the problem is there are many women doctors out there. The literature they trained it on, again, the spec for the training, just identified mostly men as doctors. So Google actually went in and said, we're going to fix this manually, and said, now if you search for that, it can translate to she is a doctor or he is a doctor. And they show you both. So it with appropriate attention to these things, there can be justice-oriented models coming out of artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, that's not always the way it's used. But we are looking at a world where increasingly artificial intelligence and machine learning and algorithms of all types are being used to determine so much of our existence. I mean, down to, our credit score, whether we can open a bank account even. And also now insurance companies are using more and more advanced machine learning to determine our rates. Something that credit card companies, insurance companies, banks are all doing. They're not just looking at, well, first they are looking at your credit score for sure. But they're also looking at your purchases and your social media history in some cases, and looking at and to see somebody with your history of purchasing things on Amazon at 3 a.m. Every Saturday night, might be they could say, oh, you're more likely to default on a loan, so we're not going to give you a loan, or we're going to cut the credit limit on your card because there's some sort of statistical correlation being made, but the statistical correlations could be entirely incorrect, right? They're not looking at any human factor when it comes to this. They're just looking at numbers on a screen, and for that are convenient for them and that they think are going to increase their profits without ever recognizing human factors that are involved.
So many of these algorithms, so many of these kind of ways of detecting and predicting can absolutely be wrong. I know it horrifies me the degree to which so many of these decisions are essentially being kind of automated, and the kind of lack of transparency, whether that's with Facebook's ad system, whether that's with as we're just talking about determining kind of people's access to credit or whatnot. And it really, at its worst can kind of build in the same systemic biases, but then also can create these sort of absolute kind of random calamities that are life affecting in so many ways.
That's right. I mean, they're forgetting the human effectively, and it's all in the drive for greater and greater profit. And by forgetting the human and focusing on the money, they are making the rest of us suffer.
Yeah. So you brought one more article in for this week's segment. This is from BuzzFeed News. This is titled "One of the biggest at-home DNA testing companies is working with the FBI." Some unfortunate news there, but it also kind of confirms what I feel like a lot of people already kind of know or would have suspected about what these DNA companies that we keep hearing about are doing. I'm wondering what your kind of perspective on that is, and if I'm missing any kind of key details or whatnot from that explanation.
No, I mean, this one's kind of personal to me too. I have not done one of these DNA tests where they send you a kit, you swab the inside of your cheek, you send it back to them, they tell you, oh, you're 20% Italian, 30% British, et cetera, et cetera, and you are maybe more likely to have this disease or that, whatever it is, right? I would love to do one of these to find out more about my genetic family history. But it's things like this, right? The fact that, first of all, this stuff goes to a private company that has no transparency. And then these companies are now working with the FBI. This isn't the first time either. But a couple of years ago, they found the Golden State Killer, or suspected Golden State Killer. I don't think he's been convicted yet. In California, because his brother, I believe his brother was in a DNA database. He wasn't even in it. And that's, and that's how they found him. But now it's this family tree DNA is working directly with the FBI for access to the kits, the DNA kits that people send in. It is, absolutely ridiculous that this is the focus of the FBI when there are so many thousands and tens of thousands of, for example, rape cases that haven't even been processed yet in cities across the country. And this is where the FBI is focusing its time.
Yeah, and that point kind of strikes a nerve here because when for instance Austin Police Department a while back did finally quote unquote clear their rape kit backlog. They had a backlog that was very long. I believe some of the rape kits were not even useful anymore because they had grown mold or whatnot. As they cleared their backlog, they also falsely listed many of these. They incorrectly miscategorized many of these as having been quote unquote solved, when in fact no one had ever been arrested, to essentially, kind of puff up their, to straight up lie about their, crime solving rate, their rate of solving these crimes. Just absolutely disgusting there that would be the kind of priority. And it's also, the disturbing thing about the DNA, part of this to me is that it's not just you can opt out of this, but you can't make your entire family opt out of this. So someone can be interested in this sort of thing and submit their DNA that's in your family, and then all of a sudden the FBI also then has information on you as well. So it to me goes into so many kind of violations of privacy, and I just don't even think people understand the full impact of it at this moment. Not only not thinking about what all information can be found with DNA, but then also what the FBI, what an organization with a history like the FBI might, intend to do with this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. These services should be provided for good, right? These services could be publicly run, they could be transparent, they could be privacy oriented, and they could be used to help us, for example, make medical decisions or just understand who we are. But instead, they are used for profit, and they are used, we pay them to spy on us, effectively. We pay them to give the FBI our information. And it is a travesty, and it's outrageous that this is allowed to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our last minute or two, is there anything else that's kind of been brought to your attention, or anything else you'd like to comment on that we might not have gotten a chance to discuss in the past half hour?
Yeah, there have been a lot of stories that we have been watching. I think one thing back on political censorship is early February, Facebook decided that it would not allow people to publish a post in solidarity with the people of Venezuela from the Cuban Communist Party's Granma. If you go to en.granma.cu, there's a great article that says Venezuela is not alone, but Facebook wanted Venezuela to be alone, and so prevented people from posting this. And it was only because of outrage on Facebook and Twitter and in alternate press that Facebook relented and started letting people post this. Venezuela is also a target now of Twitter. Twitter recently, late January, took down many accounts, of what it said was, Venezuelan interference in their own internal country. So we need to be always aware of this.
Oh my God, Venezuelan hackers. That's horrifying. It's amazing that all of these evil hackers only seem to come from enemies that are targets of a U.S. sanction and economic warfare. It's amazing that all, this kind of interference comes everywhere, and that Venezuelan the Venezuelan people with Twitter accounts would have the audacity to interfere in their own elections. Jesus.
Exactly.
All right. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to end it. We've been talking with Chris Garaffa. This is our segment Tech for the People. Talking about sort of technology news for the working class. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on once again.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic is produced at KOOP Community Radio in Austin, Texas, and is also syndicated on WHIV 102.3 FM in New Orleans. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic. Or you can visit us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX. Thanks for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.